Thank my friend, the chairman, and this is a difficult issue because, frankly, I very much agree with my friend, Ms. Lee, my friend, Mr. McGovern, that we need a new AUMF. I've been very consistent with that over the years, and I certainly was supportive of Ms. Lee's amendment in the committee. Now, when I did that, I also knew that we would have a point of order lodged against us because we are the Appropriations Committee and we don't have the power to actually, the jurisdiction to act in this area. But I still think we need to do something to, frankly, catch the attention of our own leadership on both sides of the aisle. Frankly, and I cast no aspersions to anybody, but sometimes it's sort of like when you're growing up, your parents can protect you too much. I think the leaders of both parties have protected the Congress from a difficult vote for many, many years. We had this debate on the floor on the National Defense Authorization Act and on my amendment. Chairman Thornberry and Mr. Smith both pointed out that the House Armed Services Committee had tried to deal with this issue in 2011 and in 2012. But in each case, the United States Senate chose not to act on it. And I think they chose not to act on it because, and this is my opinion, I don't know this, but my opinion was Democratic majorities at risk, and a Democratic majority leader in the United States Senate didn't want to have his people have to cast a difficult vote. If you recall that period of time, they weren't doing much voting over there anyway. I mean, they simply didn't vote at all. So I think the effort, and I give Ms. Lee, frankly, all the credit. Nobody has fought longer or harder to force this Congress to go back and do its job. She was against the original AUMF because she saw at the time exactly what happened. This has been used over and over and over again by presidents of both parties to go to war in places that we had no congressional authorization to go to, in my opinion, and that we did not have a debate on. And so I thought it might catch somebody's attention if that amendment moved forward. People seem to have forgotten I actually supported it 2 years previously as well. It wasn't just this time. So I was approached by the speaker with, he said, look, jurisdictionally, this can't happen. And he made another point, which I agree with, which is the administration ought to participate in this exercise. You know, they ought to have an opportunity to put in a report to tell us what their justification is, their legal justification, what their strategic objectives are, what they think the cost is going to be, what the strategy ought to be. And so I certainly agreed. He said, would you carry that? If we did that, and we negotiated the language out over a couple of days, and I did, and was happy to do that, because now at least that report will be written within 30 days of the signing of the Defense Authorization Act, and now I guess potentially the Defense Appropriations Act, although I will actually tell you, and I'll speak to this when we get to the gist of the bill, I have considerable agreements with my friends on both sides of the aisle as to how far this is going to get. But I think the Defense Authorization Act will get through. At some point, you know, and this is a ticklishly difficult situation. I don't want to just be critical of the leaders of both parties for protecting their members. I will say they had a knotty problem as well. This is an enemy like no other. We're fighting a war like we've never fought before. And we have an enemy that can morph into many different forms and many different organizations. And it's transnational. We're not fighting a traditional nation state. And that makes crafting of the appropriate authority, I think, difficult. It's one of the reasons why I like some of the ideas that have been proposed by my friends on both sides of the aisle, that we limit in a temporal frame the amount of time you have to do this, so Congress is forced to revisit this on a regular occasion. And I've been asked on many occasions, well, what's your idea of an AUMF? I said, I actually don't have a perfect idea. I want the committees, I want the administration to submit one, and the committees to look at it and do what we do legislatively, have a real debate, a real discussion, craft something that can pass, but let's not kid ourselves that it's an appropriate thing for us to sit here 16 years after an authorization was passed, when most of us, the majority of us, were not even in Congress at the time, and we're going to war on it over and over and over again. I actually asked the Secretary of Defense in Defense Appropriations hearing, would a new AUMF be helpful? particularly with regards to Syria and ISIS. And he said, yes, it would be helpful. He thought he thought that the men and women that we send out to tough places who put their lives on the line ought to know the Congress of the United States is for them being there, has directed them to be there. That he thought that would be useful. Now, the administration, like all administrations, has said they think they have sufficient legal authority to do whatever it is they're doing. And the Obama administration said precisely the same thing. And I would just tell you that tells me our founders were pretty smart. They know the executive branch will always tell you it has the legal authority to do whatever it is they happen to be doing at the time. Whether they do or not depends ultimately on the courts, I suppose, but it depends on whether we push back ourselves. You know, the Constitution's pretty clear where war-making authority is. So I thought the proposal of the Speaker to give the administration an opportunity to participate in the debate, to not just rely on exactly the same thing the Obama administration relied on, to rethink this, and for Congress to rethink this too. Again, my friend Miss Lee was, you know, she was prescient, 16, 17 years ago. I guarantee you nobody that voted for that thought it would be used the way it has been used and stretched as far as it has been stretched. And I'm not critical of that Congress. They were acting within days of a brutal and barbaric attack on the United States that left thousands of our citizens dead. They were ready to get in the fight. But I'm not sure we understood the nature of the enemy or the warfare then. We understand a lot more now. And it's time to go back again. And if we're going to be in this thing, give our military the assurance that they have the backing, hopefully on a bipartisan basis. And I think this would be a very bipartisan debate. I actually do. I think my colleagues feel very strongly about this no matter where they come down. And I find different people in different parties actually sometimes have the same view or opposing views within their own party. So I think it's an important exercise to do, but I recognize we were stretching our jurisdictional authority at the time we did it. So with that, and I look forward, I know my friend Ms. Lee will be here later. I look forward to engaging in that debate, but I think we got to the point that we're going to have this discussion, or at least we're going to have the vehicle to have this discussion because of her action, because of the things she did. That made people have to come to the table and have to begin looking at this. I've had discussion with the Secretary of the Foreign Relations Committee about this, I've discussion with the Speaker about this, any number of members. And as my friend Mr. McGovern said on the floor, it's a baby step, and I think that's a fair characterization. But it's a step in the right direction, and it's a step that I think will give everybody the opportunity to participate in the debate. And I want to defend my friend Ms. Lee, by the way, on another point where a lot of people said this immediately, took away the justification of the war. It did not. You can look at her wording. She gave us 240 days after the passage of the bill to write a new AUMF. So it extended it, but it put a limit on it. And in that sense, it did what I think we ought to do in anything we pass, put some sort of limit on it so it comes back to Congress again. Now, I know there's a lot of people that wonder whether or not we can get anything done in 240 days. I wonder that myself. But I still, if we can't get a majority of the Congress of the United States to support the deployment of American forces into harm's way, then we shouldn't be there. We shouldn't be there. And by the way, sometimes you can't get a majority even when you should be there. But that's the point is the responsibility is here, and men and women count on us to discharge our responsibilities. They're darn sure discharging theirs. They're going where they're asked to do and doing what they're asked to do. They should know the Congress of the United States for it. So I welcome this as one of the several vehicles at which we'll have this discussion, and I think it actually builds up momentum for something more serious and sustainable in the fall. At least that's my hope. If I prove wrong in that, well, then I'll push a little bit further out of my lane. But I think in this case, something had to be done. I thank the Speaker, something was done, and we'll see whether or not it takes us in the right direction.
Well,
I'd certainly yield to my friend.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the gentleman's comments, and I appreciate his commitment on this issue. But what he just described is basically an argument for the Lee Amendment. It's ironic, in this committee, before this panel came to testify, we were hearing about that Congress needs to reclaim its power when it came to weakening a consumer protection, that we have to reclaim our power. And then yet, when it comes to the issue of war, we're willing to continue to kick the can down the road. And I supported the gentleman's amendment, but it doesn't require us to do anything after that. The Lee amendment says you got 8 months to come up with an AUMF. I mean, if we can't do it, that's plenty of time to consult with the military, the administration, with anybody who wants to be consulted with. If we can't come up with something in 8 months, it means we don't have the political will to do it. And I agree with the gentleman. If you don't have the political will to do it, then we ought not to have our brave men and women in harm's way. If we don't have the guts to be able to vote up or down on something like this. And, you know, I mean, we've been having this discussion pretty much for 16 years, and there's always an excuse why we can't do it. Barbara Lee's amendment was germane. I mean, maybe it's subject to a point of order, but as the chairman of this committee just said at the beginning in response to Ms. Lowy, we could do anything we want up here. I'm willing to guess that a lot of these riders that are not germane to these appropriations bills that are going to be protected, rules committees give them protections. So we could do this, but I mean, all her amendment says is we're ending this outdated AUMF. You got 8 months to come up with a new one. We can't do that. Then then there's something wrong up here. We can't bring ourselves to debate this issue, and we're going to have different opinions on it. But I just this is so frustrating, and I think it is so insulting to the people we put in harm's way. And yet we just go on.
Well, gentlemen, reclaim my time, but I'll certainly yield time to you again, because there's not much you said with that I disagree with. The difference, I think, is, and I think this is really important, is, we normally wouldn't do something of this magnitude on the floor of the House in a short debate over an amendment. We normally would do this by moving it through committee. I'm a big believer in the much maligned and frankly now twisted and torn committee process. And I'll have a chance to talk about that in a bit too. But I don't want to deliberately undermine it. I want to at least try it. Because, look, I watch this. Our bills get better. We originally, this is a little bit off point, but originally when we were trying to rush bills through to meet deadlines, there was some discussion in the Republican conference that we'd do essentially what these gentlemen and ladies are doing here, and then the Cardinals would just write the other 9 bills. That's crazy. And I said that was crazy at the time. I don't want that authority. You should not want to give me the ability to spend $156 billion without going through a committee and giving my friends who exercised their right to amend vigorously last week for 11 hours in the markup. That bill gets better because of that. Doesn't get worse, it gets better. And we will, none of these bills are final. They're all going to change in the course of the process anyway. But you want as much committee involvement. So that would be, one of my concerns about the Lee amendment. But I recognize the validity of the argument. We're not doing our business. And if I have to do this to move it, I'm going to do it.
And if the gentleman could just yield to me for 2
That's certainly.
Yeah. I mean, 8 months, the committees can do lots of stuff in 8 months. And the fact that the committees haven't acted up to this point, I don't know why. I mean, you mentioned the Obama administration. They actually submitted an AUMF that my Republican friends didn't like, but we didn't act on it. So we can, but 8 months, you could have lots of committee hearings and lots of consultation, and we could get something, to the floor. Maybe not something that will pass unanimously, but probably something that would pass with a majority in this House and a majority in the Senate. So I appreciate the gentleman's sentiments. This is just deeply frustrating, and I just there's no excuse for it, and it is what it is. So I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
Certainly thank the gentleman as well. Want to continue and will continue to work with him on this, and. I'll take, look, I'm a classic appropriator. If I can get a little bit, I'll take it. And then I'll come back for a little bit more and a little bit more. Certainly yield to my friend from Florida.
Thank you very much. Am I correct that Ms. Lee's amendment was passed in a bipartisan way out of the appropriations?
That's correct.
That being said, and then the chairman's assertion at the outset that we can change language if we want to, did that have an impact on the decision with reference to the importance of the Appropriations Committee, notwithstanding so-called jurisdictional issues, How did that affect you all when you're thinking that our colleagues thought well enough of the Lee Amendment to pass it out in a bipartisan fashion? And here it comes, and then the way it was taken out is a part of the problem. The process, that there was no outward discussion. When Barbara came to talk with me, I didn't even know what she was talking about because it had just been taken out. You know, and if y'all can take stuff out, I hope we can put stuff in sometimes.
Gentlewoman is recognized. Yes, ma'am.
Very much.
Thank
I'm
you.
glad Jim got to speak because he really has seriously worked on this issue for many years. But the fact that this thing is 16 years old, and as all of you pointed out, continuously going to war without trying to upgrade reflects very badly on our democracy. And I appreciate Mr. Cole's explanation, but I'm still not clear in my mind what happened. As I read about it, there was some legerdemain that took place there and that Barbara didn't know about. I congratulate her the day after the unanimous, I think it was a unanimous vote, wasn't it? Voice vote? No? Okay. And she was nervous as a cat then. I said, you know, great, we finally see the end of light at the end of the tunnel here. And she said, the speaker's going to take it away. I said, I don't see how he can. But now we see how he can. So I just want to say that it has nothing to do with the kind of process that I believe that was supposed to take place in the Congress of the United States. Whether they were just kept fooling her or not, she got the votes, and it passed. And by all that's holy and all of Jefferson's manual, it should be in order. But I'll tell you, waiting for this AUMF is very similar to waiting for Godot. It never happens. And if you would ask any one of us why, I don't think we could give any kind of decent answer because I've never heard one of why in the world are we afraid to do that, which is our purview, and take us completely out. The Congress of the United States is supposed to declare war, taking us totally out of the process, and to substitute the way to get the AUMF in 8 months with a study, I think just throws us back in the weeds here. And I'm very sorry for it, and I must say it's a blow to me personally. Thank you.
The gentlewoman who engaged me for a moment, is yours a study, Mr. Cole?
Yes.
Yeah, it is. You're not, you cannot legally, I actually wanted and raised this issue with the parliamentarian, can we require the Foreign Relations Committee to pick this up and act on it? And we cannot. We do not have the power by law to require a congressional committee to do something.
But you can, through this law, require the administration to provide you
Correct.
strategy and data and information.
And
that
legal justification.
And legal justification. That is not in any way what I would necessarily term a study. I believe we're trying
I
to
think
get,
it's called a study, is it not?
for the language, it is actually professionally asking the administration to provide us data and information about this issue so that Congress can appropriately do this. And I will tell you, looking right at you, there's not one bone in my body that's trying to get out of doing this. I'm trying to get us to it.
Well, I have no reason I've not asked her at all. I'm a great admirer of Barbara Lee because she does good legislation. She's a good member. But she was blindsided by this. She followed all the rules. She put out her amendment. It was accepted there. Not that you're in the wrong place, Miss Lee. You got to go somewhere else with this thing. And it was accepted and voted on. And for the life of me, I can't see that that's regular order.
Will the gentlelady yield?
I will.
This is a long explanation or comparison maybe that might not be accurate, but I think it's illustrative. I've been in a situation like this before. I worked long and hard over a fix of a bad Supreme Court decision. It's called the Carcieri decision, and it affects the ability, actually I was on the same side with the Obama administration, it affects the ability of both the Bush administration and the Obama administration to put land in the trust. But we can't deal, and I actually once got it all the way across the floor with the Democratic majority in appropriations in Interior when Jim Moran was the chairman. He said, would you bring that amendment? And I said, yes, sir. And I talked to my friend, Mr. Simpson, who's there, and because he was the ranking member at the time, and I said, I think I've got the ability to do this. What do you think? He said, Tom, that would be legislating on appropriations bill. You can't do that until we do. And we got it across the
What do you
floor.
think?
And we got it with Democratic votes, Republicans putting the amendment in, all the Democrats supporting it, and all the way across the floor, it died in the Senate. So Mr. Simpson and Mr. Calvert and Ms. McCullum and a lot of us have been working on this issue for a lot of years to try and solve it. We thought we had reached an agreement with the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee to put it in an appropriations bill and at least fix it up to 2010. The very last day before we were to mark up that bill in subcommittee, a misunderstanding had clearly occurred. I don't know if it's the staff level or whatever, and the chairman of Natural Resources added language that we had no time to vet, and so we just went ahead with what we thought the original agreement was. Point is, he filed a point of order against what we had done, and it was stripped, I think, before it ever got to this committee. I know it never got to the floor. And we went down there and had a colloquy about it because it was a little bit of an embarrassing situation. So I'm telling you, or in my opinion, I'm no expert, I value very much what Ms. Lee did, but I also know that it can be stripped out like that. And it doesn't have to be done here. I mean, I've seen it done. I've had it done to me by a Republican majority. So it's not partisan, it's jurisdictional. It's chairman asserting jurisdiction within our committee, which they have every right to do.
Well, let me have one more short question, and to Mr. Cole, if I may. Yours is going to pass. Are we assured then that in 90 days we will be able to do a new AUMF?
No. And I think the gentlelady makes a very good point. We are not assured of that. Now, I think it gets tougher for the Committee of Jurisdiction when they have a justification and a report and mounting bipartisan pressure to do something, not to do something. But I've seen people around here not do things a lot. And I've seen it on both sides of the aisle, and I've seen it on both sides of the rotunda, and probably been part of it myself on occasion or two. This is not an easy thing. And it will be hard, as Mr. Smith said on the floor, but I think it has to start, and I think it would start better, not on the floor, but in the Committee of Jurisdiction. And I would hope, effectively, the administration submits their justification. We can debate whether or not we think that's sufficient. And I'm pleased that the Secretary of Defense has said in testimony before Congress, he thinks a new AUMF, is progress. So, or is necessary, something we should do. So I see
And
things.
that's the advice that you would expect him to give to the president?
I would hope so. I mean, it's not for me to speak for the secretary or for the administration, but if I were watching this thing, I'd say this kettle is going to blow at some point if we don't do something about this and get everybody on the same page. So I don't know, but I think this and it's just my opinion. You have to make judgment in this business. In my opinion, we have a better chance pushing this amendment that I had on the NDAA, and it's been put here, than we do the other way. But if it doesn't work, it doesn't mean I'm going to quit. I'm working at it, or I would accept whatever we saw. I think this needs to happen. So I've picked, a way that I think in consultation with the speaker. I've worked with speakers and against them. When I worked with them, I usually won. When I worked against them, I always lost. So I usually try to, if I can find a way to move forward, this seemed to me one to do that. I think the other thing was very important, though, because we wouldn't be to this point without Ms. Lee's amendment. That is just the truth. And if anybody thinks that amendment's going away, they don't know Barbara Lee very well, and they haven't paid much attention to the last 16 years. So I think this debate's coming, and I think this moves it toward us, but that's just my opinion.
I apologize for taking so much time, as I know we've got a long night ahead of us, but
In
this
fact,
is
we
really
do.
important.
That's right.
Our military counts on us for more than procrastination.
Well, the member.
And for the life of me, I don't know why we don't do it. It seems
sure there
we
are
are
lots of
required to do it, and I don't know why not. Thank you, Mr.
Will the gentleman yield?
Colorado.
Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me, just a
Thank you.
moment. The gentleman from Colorado.
Yeah, just to further discussions, obviously, we have a lot of, this is very important because we're talking about, our nation's defense here. It seems to me that a majority, as has been shown, a majority of the members of this body would like the AUMF AUMF limitation language in. I don't think anybody doubts the ability of this committee to take it out, but it seems like what's being done is subverting the will of a majority of the members of this body by this committee. This committee has, on a number of occasions, instructed committees of jurisdictions to do work. That's essentially what the Budget Reconciliation Act is. It instructs committees to do that work. Normally, of course, the appropriations language would not instruct committees of jurisdiction to do work, but here in this committee, we can do that. We don't do what's normal a lot of the time, right? I mean, we can do whatever we want here, as the chair indicated. So there's no particular problem with, if this committee chooses to, we can certainly instruct a committee to do that work. We do that, wouldn't say routinely, but we do that from time to time. And so this would be no different. I first would just point out that there is a version that's been filed by Ms. Lee and Mr. Jones, number 96, that would express the sentiments of this AUMF amendment as simply a funding proposition, namely it would prohibit funding for the 2001 AUMF after 240 days after enactment. So, I mean, that is a very straightforward funding restriction analogous to others. So I guess my two questions are, yeah, that's germane. So again, I know that on some occasions we do tell committees of jurisdiction what to do. I guess the question is, why isn't this one of them? And then failing that, can we at least have the chair's assurance that we can have a perfectly germane amendment that is expressed as a funding prohibition, to be discussed and debated and voted on the floor?
These are all good ideas. The facts of the case are pretty simple. There was a discussion that took place. He will, and I'll get to him. The gentleman was seeking that, and I gave Mr. Polis the opportunity to express himself. These are important issues and ideas, and we're trying to allow the members of the committee, and I know the gentlewoman asked the question, how and why. We're trying to offer some explanation. The gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll always yield to the chairman in answering. I think one of the interesting things here, in listening to this back and forth, it brings back some very, real and pertinent information and things that need to happen. But as, frankly, one speaking from this dais is the only one who has actually been deployed under an AUMF, this is something that needs to be discussed. And I believe that, frankly, in all due respect to the chairman and the committee, this was the wrong place. But I respect the chairman and the others to let it come forward. I knew there would be a point of reference. That's what Mr. Cole spoke of. I applaud Barbara Lee for her fight and tenacity on this. It takes a lot to be the only no vote on something that at a pertinent time was very popular. But like I said, at this point in time, let's begin this process of looking at it. I agree with what Mr. Cole has said, my friend from Oklahoma. We've got this thing to a point now, and the gentlelady, ranking member, she made a great point. Will this actually happen? Well, I think that's a perfect opportunity to say, with the pressure points that have been applied here, I still don't think the process was right in getting us here. But I think what has now happened through the NDA amendment is there. And and from both sides of the aisle is someone, like I said, who's actually been deployed under an AUMF, who has doubts about where we're at right now, and having a new administration to talk about this, there is pressure from across the aisles. There is something that needs to be done here, which I'm more than willing to be a part of. But as we look forward, there are things that I'm on record of talking about, that Iraq, others, that need to be gone, that need to be changed. We're not there in that capacity anymore, and we've used that. We go back to the general GWAT, the original one, where we just basically say wherever we need to go. These are things that need to be discussed. We can go on process, and I agree with it. Mr. McGovern makes a very fine argument. We've debated these things many times, and processes matter, just as it was under your leadership, ranking member, is others. We make choices and make decisions. I do believe that Chairman Cole makes a great point as far as both sides have been protected in this issue. We've been protected from both sides of this Capitol. My concern at this point, and we are going to have a later night, but I could not let this time pass without simply saying, as one who has been there, who's one who's actually understood the cost of this from a congressional perspective, and also as someone who had to fly over and be there. We need to have this debate. For me, I want to continue to have this debate. It came to us in a very frustrating moment, so now we're tied up in knots a little bit on should it come out, should it not come out. It was that. I get that. But I think at the end of the day, for folks like myself, for Mr. Cole, I would hope to speak for my friends, for Mr. McGovern and Paul. This is our opportunity to do it. If we fail on this with the new administration's input, with a set time frame, then yes, then there is a problem. But I think standing with Mr. Cole on what he has done, where we're at right now, is let's move wherever you want to on this bill. And there's enough for us to disagree on everything else. But at least at this point, I want to commend Ms. Lee for her tenacity and staying at this. I just believe it was the wrong place at the wrong time to do it this way, but it triggered something that is the right place and the right way and still needs to get to the proper committee. And that's where I think we can get with this. So I mean, we're in agreement in that regard. I think from here, it allows us to have this discussion with the new administration's input, and we move from there. And at that point, I think we can move forward. We voted for it or against it, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, it was so eloquently stated, it is about the men and women who go and fight. Yeah, it is for those of us who actually, and there's many members now who have fought in Iraq and Afghanistan who are some of the loudest ones saying these things need to be addressed on a bipartisan basis across the aisle, who've actually been there. And so I think that's the kind of pressure that we'll leave in the proper way, in the proper time, do that, and I think we're going to move forward on that. And I applaud Mr. Cole for stepping forward and doing this, taking something that he really would have preferred to go on even further. But taking that and finding, I think what he said a few minutes ago applies to our House as a whole, both parties, both sides, is that sometimes we can't take victories and call them victories. We have to have everything at one time, and sometimes that's going to lead us down a very bad path. So as we look forward to that, let's talk about how we can win and how we can move forward for the betterment of who we are as a country and who we are as the people who fight. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Is there any other member that was wish to be heard? I will just end up saying, I feel like policy is important and money is important, and I felt like this was a policy issue. And I feel like it is a policy issue, not to be confused with the money issue of funding our military, and I feel very strongly about that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I was just wondering if you meant, if we wanted to be heard on the AUMF. I'm done being heard on that, but I did want to, I haven't had a chance to talk with the panel. I wasn't sure what you were referring to, whether we were done with the AUMF or the panel.
I was in reference to the AUMF.
Yes, I'm done with that.
Does gentleman wish time?
Not even, I don't know if I'm next, though. Am I next?
Well, we're trying, we've just gone to opening statements about trying to answer Mrs. Lowy, who I told her I was willing to discuss anything that she brought to the committee. I told her there were 3 things. We've now talked about 2. Does the gentlewoman, does the committee wish to talk further about her questions? Okay, hearing no desire to do that, we will move on forward. I want to thank each of you for, no, you're not about to go yet, but Mr. Chairman, how many amendments did you have in your subcommittee? During the committee? Yes, sir. 2. 2 ideas that came to your subcommittee for you to consider?
We incorporated, over 1,000 member requests into our
Okay,
bill report
1,000 member
language.
requests,
But-
excuse me.
But there were 2 amendments that were considered
Okay.
during the committee. I know that included the manager's amendment, but 2 or 3.
So you had opened yourself up to the feedback from this body?
Yes.
Yes, you did. Thank you very much. Mr. Cole.
And the